A-list ambience. The valet, a kid barely old enough to shave, nearly choked as he recognized the driver pulling up to the Olympus. Jason Statham in the flesh. He handed over the keys to his vintage Aston Martin, the engine purring like a contented lion, and offered a curt nod. He didn't linger for the gushing praise he knew was coming, instead melting into the throng of people already spilling out onto the red carpet. Inside, the Olympus was less a gym and more a temple to physical perfection. Water features gurgled along walls clad in imported Italian marble. The air, subtly scented with eucalyptus and something vaguely metallic, hummed with the low thrum of expensive machinery. Rows of treadmills faced floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Los Angeles, a concrete jungle stretching out beneath the setting sun. A juice bar, staffed by sculpted servers in pristine white uniforms, dispensed concoctions with names like the Zeus and the Aphrodite. Statham navigated the room with the practiced ease of a predator in its natural habitat. A few familiar faces, directors he'd worked with, actors he'd punched, on screen, of course, offered greetings. He returned them with a slight inclination of his head, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He wasn't there to schmooze. He was there because the owner, an old friend, had practically begged him, and because, truth be told, he was curious. This place was certainly something. He caught sight of Dolph Lundgren across the room, locked in conversation with Sylvester Stallone. A veritable explosion of testosterone contained within a single corner. Statham decided to give them a wide berth. Instead, he gravitated towards the weights area, a gleaming expanse of chrome and leather. He ran a hand over a custom-built bench press, its stitching as precise as the workings of a Swiss watch. Just then, a flashbulb exploded, momentarily blinding him. He instinctively shielded his eyes, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. He hated being photographed. "Sorry," a voice chirped, a touch too brightly. "Didn't see you there, Mr. Statham."
Izzy Diaz, La Confidential Magazine.
Huge fan. Izzy Diaz, clutching her camera like a lifeline, wasn't sorry at all. She'd been staking out the event for an hour, weaving through the Botox socialites and preening influencers, searching for a story. The Olympus was a goldmine of potential scandals, a glittering facade hiding, she suspected, a whole lot of rot. And Jason Statham, looking utterly out of place amidst the opulence, was definitely part of the story. She lowered her camera, offering a disarming smile. "Great turnout, isn't it? What do you think of the place?" Statham sized her up. The direct gaze, the too casual posture, the subtle tremor in her hand. She was a reporter, all right, a hungry one. "It's a gym," he said, his voice a low rumble, "with delusions of grandeur." Izzy laughed, a genuine, throaty sound that cut through the manufactured buzz of the room. "Exactly. My thoughts precisely. So, Mr. Statham, between takes, do you see yourself working out here? Amongst the beautiful people?" She gestured around the room, taking in the parade of surgically enhanced bodies and designer workout gear. He followed her gaze, his eyes lingering on a woman struggling to lift a 5-pound weight while simultaneously adjusting her designer sunglasses. He raised an eyebrow. "I prefer my gyms a little less theatrical." Izzy grinned. She had him. He was wary, definitely, but he was also intrigued. "Well, Mr. Statham," she said, extending a hand, "it's been a pleasure. Perhaps we can continue this conversation later." He shook her hand, his grip firm but brief. "Perhaps," he said, his eyes already scanning the room, searching for an escape route. Izzy watched him go, a predatory gleam in her eyes. The game was afoot, and she had a feeling it was going to be a good one. The air crackled with a nervous energy, a prelude to something significant. She could taste it. The mauler enters. The murmur of polite conversation shattered. The double doors of the ballroom burst inward, propelled by a force that felt more like a battering ram than a human hand. Marco Valenti, a human ox in a suit that strained at the seams, filled the doorway. Behind him surged a wave of hangers-on, a gaggle of bleached blondes in dresses that looked painted on, Two hulking figures who could have doubled as refrigerators, and a man wielding a professional-grade camera, already flashing away. "Valenti's in the house," Marco bellowed, his voice thick with an unearned bravado. The sound ricocheted off the crystal chandeliers, silencing the string quartet mid-phrase. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and a ripple of unease spread through the room like a dropped ink blot. He paused, striking a pose with one arm flexed, the other gesturing grandly as if he just single-handedly discovered a new continent. The camera flashed relentlessly, blindingly. He lapped it up, preening under the artificial spotlight. "Looking good, Marco. Looking real good." One of his behemoth companions roared, adding fuel to the fire. Izzy Diaz, perched near the edge of the dance floor with a glass of sparkling water. A poor substitute for a story, she thought, felt a prickle of awareness. This was a disruption, a manufactured spectacle. She recognized the signs.
Marco Valenti.
The name tasted like metal in her mouth. She'd seen him fight once. Brutal. Unnecessarily so. He was moving now, wading into the crowd like a shark in a school of fish. His laughter, loud and grating, cut through the air. He stopped by a cluster of men in tailored suits, slapping one on the back with enough force to send him stumbling. "Heard you made a killing this quarter, pal. Mind sharing some of that with the mauler?" The man, clearly uncomfortable, forced a smile.
Marco.
"Good to see you." Marco, oblivious or uncaring, continued his boisterous performance. He caught sight of himself in a mirrored wall and paused again, adjusting his tie with theatrical flair. "Gotta look sharp," he announced to no one in particular. "For when I knock out Statham." Izzy's hand tightened around her glass. Statham was here. She'd almost forgotten, lulled into a false sense of security by the champagne and canapés. But Marco Valenti, with his bluster and blatant self-promotion, was a walking, talking headline waiting to happen. A car crash in slow motion. He was scanning the room now, his eyes narrowed, a predatory glint in them, looking for something, or someone. Izzy knew, with a certainty that settled heavy in her stomach, that whatever happened next wouldn't be pretty. She raised her camera phone casually, pretending to take a selfie. But her lens was focused on Marco Valenti, and the gathering storm brewing in his eyes. He was on the hunt. Verbal sparring. Marco's voice, laced with contempt, knifed through the post-fight murmur. "Well, look what we have here. Statham. Decided to grace us with your presence. Slumming it with actual warriors. Are we?" Statham, Izzy close behind as he headed for the exit, halted. A sigh, barely audible against the rising tide of the crowd's noise, escaped him.
Marco.
Always a delight. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. Turning, a practiced smile stretched across his face, but a hard glint resided in his eyes. Perhaps simple curiosity, or the fatigue of a man backed into a corner. Marco, inflated with self-importance like some grotesque amphibian, sauntered forward, his retinue of admirers spreading out behind him. A miasma of cheap aftershave and desperation hung in the air around him.
Actual warriors. Statham.
Something you wouldn't recognize unless they were rearranging your face. He punctuated the air inches from Statham's chest. "What brings you here, anyway?" "Scouting locations for your next tough guy charade." Izzy, notebook at the ready, observed with objective interest. Marco's flamboyant aggression was a constant font of drama, and drama equaled page views. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes flitting between the two men, cataloging every gesture and expression. A low chuckle, a resonant vibration, rumbled from Statham's chest. "Merely enjoying the spectacle, Marco. Offering support to the performing arts." He gestured expansively towards the ravaged cage. Marco's face deepened to a furious crimson. "Arts? You think this is entertainment? This is grit and sacrifice, friend. Reality. A concept lost on you, shielded by stuntmen and CGI." He closed the remaining space, crowding Statham. "Why don't you try a round in that octagon, Statham? See if you're as formidable as your paycheck suggests." A buzz rippled through the surrounding throng. Heads swiveled, voices faded, and phones materialized, filming. The air thrummed with anticipation. Marco, emboldened by the burgeoning audience, pressed his advantage. Getting cold feet, Statham? Figured. All talk, no bite. Just like your movies. Marco spat, the glob landing close to Statham's polished shoes. Tinseltown trash. Statham's smile finally dissolved. He straightened, his shoulders drawing back. The weariness vanished, replaced by a frigid focus. He didn't even acknowledge the spittle. You know, Marco, he murmured, his voice a dangerous undertone. I was on my way out, but you're right. Something is missing this evening. A touch of amusement. He flicked a glance towards Izzy, a spark of devilry in his expression. Wouldn't you say? Izzy's heart skipped a beat. Amusement didn't even begin to cover it. This was about to become a legend. Drawing the line, Statham sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The low hum of the crowd, a mix of nervous energy and drunken anticipation, was starting to grate. He'd been hoping for a quiet corner, a brief respite before the main event, but Marco the Mauler Valenti seemed determined to make that impossible. Hey Statham, still hydrating for your nap, old man? Marco's voice, amplified by his proximity, cut through the din. He swaggered closer, a smirk plastered on his face. Izzy Diaz trailing behind him like a shadow. Statham forced a smile. Just enjoying the ambience, Marco. You should try it sometime. Might calm your nerves. Marco barked out a laugh. A harsh, unpleasant sound. Nerves? I eat nerves for breakfast, Statham. You're the one who should be nervous. Word on the street is you haven't thrown a decent punch since your daughter started kindergarten. Izzy, notepad in hand, watched the exchange with rapt attention, her pen poised. She was practically vibrating with journalistic anticipation. Statham thought, a little unfairly. He ignored Marco's jab, taking a slow sip of his drink. Good for her. She's doing quite well in school, actually. Top of her class in, well, never mind. He deliberately trailed off, hoping to bore Marco into silence. It didn't work. Yeah, well, being related to you probably isn't helping her social life, is it? Imagine having that for a dad. Probably tells all her friends bedtime stories about cauliflower ears and CTE. Marco's eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. The air in the small space seemed to thicken. The background noise faded, replaced by a low thrumming in Statham's ears. He felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. He hadn't seen his daughter in months, caught up in the endless cycle of training and promotion. Marco's words, casual as they were, hit a raw nerve. Statham placed his glass on the nearby table with a soft thunk. The smile was gone, replaced by a mask of icy composure. His eyes, usually crinkled at the corners with amusement, were now fixed on Marco with unnerving intensity. There's a line, Marco, Statham said, his voice dangerously quiet. You just crossed it. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The playful glint in his eyes had vanished, replaced by something darker, something that hinted at the power he kept carefully leashed. Izzy, sensing the shift in energy, took a step back, her notepad momentarily forgotten. Marco, for the first time since their encounter began, seemed to hesitate. The bravado remained, but a flicker of uncertainty danced in his eyes. He had wanted to provoke a reaction, to unsettle Statham. He just hadn't anticipated this reaction.
À grappling proposition.
Marco the Mauler Valenti spat on the polished floor, the globule landing inches from Statham's expensive leather boots. What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue? Thought you'd have something witty to say about my mama. Or are you too busy counting your wrinkles? Izzy Diaz, notepad clutched tight in her sweating palm, shifted uncomfortably. This was spiraling. She'd wanted access, a quote, some behind-the-scenes color for her piece. She hadn't anticipated witnessing a potential street brawl. The air crackled with testosterone and something darker, a simmering malice she hadn't expected from Valenti. Statham didn't flinch. He slowly raised his gaze, his eyes, the color of storm clouds, fixed on Valenti. My compliments on your enthusiasm, Marco. Certainly something. His voice was dangerously level, a stark contrast to Valenti's rabid barking. However, I find myself disinclined to engage in this particular brand of performance art. Valenti roared with laughter, a harsh, grating sound. Performance art? You think this is a game? I'm going to rearrange that face of yours, Grandpa. He took a step forward, his fists clenched, the muscles in his thick neck bulging. Izzy instinctively edged back, her reporter's instincts warring with a primal urge to flee. This was going to get ugly. Statham sighed, a subtle exhalation that barely ruffled his perfectly coiffed hair. Violence seems pedestrian, don't you think? Especially when there are other, more refined ways to settle a dispute. He paused, a flicker of something that might have been amusement playing around his lips. Tell you what, Marco. Instead of resorting to fisticuffs like a pair of disgruntled dockworkers, how about a grappling match? A stunned silence fell over the room. Even the hangers-on, usually so eager to egg Valenti on, seemed taken aback. A grappling match? With Jason Statham? Valenti recovered first, his face splitting into a wide, predatory grin. Grappling? You think you can take me in a grappling match, you geriatric action star? He puffed out his chest, displaying his heavily tattooed biceps. You're on, old man. I'll tie you in not so bad you'll be begging for your nurse. Statham simply inclined his head. Excellent. Shall we say, 5 minutes? First to submit. Valenti slapped his open palm against his thigh, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. 5 minutes? I'll finish you in 5 seconds. Let's go. Right here. Right now. You and me. No holds barred. His eyes gleamed with anticipation, already picturing the humiliation of the aging actor. This wasn't just a fight. It was a statement, a passing of the torch, or rather a brutal extinguishing of it. He couldn't wait. Izzy scribbled furiously, her pen barely keeping pace with the unfolding drama. A grappling match? This was a story she couldn't have dreamed of. A bizarre, unexpected twist that had just ratcheted up the tension to unbearable levels. She had a feeling, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, that this was about to get very, very interesting. The mat is set. The air thrummed with electric anticipation. Chairs skidded back on the gritty floor as the bar's occupants, a volatile mix of adrenaline and budget beer, carved out an arena. Izzy, perched on her stool's precarious summit, had an unobstructed view. Fingers trembling slightly, she confirmed her phone was recording. Forget carefully managed press releases. This was real, unfiltered, and undeniably a story. 2 behemoths, undoubtedly the bouncers, hauled a threadbare rug from the depths of the back room. Its once vibrant floral pattern was now a ghostly echo of itself, marred by years of spills and grit. They unfurled it with a dusty sigh, marking the battlefield. A heady aroma filled the space. Stale lager, rising body heat, a hint of something fiercely instinctual. Marco the Mauler Valenti, a coiled spring of nervous energy, shadowboxed with flamboyant gestures, each movement a practiced taunt. A whirlwind of a spinning kick barely missed a wide-eyed bystander, provoking a shaky chuckle. Every feint, every jab was a calculated display, aimed to unnerve. He unleashed a roar, a primal sound that reverberated through the room, punctuated by the glint of gold teeth. Statham, ready to rumble, pops. Statham, however, remained an island of stillness. He hadn't stirred from his position by the bar, yet his gaze, laser-focused, tracked Valenti's every twitch. He savored a slow sip of his drink, the amber liquid gleaming in the low light. No bluster, no wasted motion, only a silent appraisal. He resembled a predator, deceptively languid but poised to strike with devastating force. His quietude was far more disquieting than Valenti's bombast. Izzy watched, transfixed. Valenti played the part of the boisterous challenger with gusto. But Statham was in another league. She'd witnessed enough fights to recognize true grit, the quiet self-assurance born not of arrogance, but of honed skill and unwavering dedication. "What's the matter, old-timer?" Valenti jeered, sinking into a wrestler's crouch. "Gonna keep me waiting all night?" He spat, the globule landing with a moist smack near the rug's edge. Statham set his glass down, the sound a soft chime in the sudden silence. He straightened, his movements smooth and purposeful.
No estraneous fleriscis.
He advanced toward the makeshift ring, his eyes locked on Valenti. The room became a vacuum of held breath, the only sound the whisper of his soles against the concrete. He stepped onto the worn rug. "The stage is set, Mr. Valenti." His voice, calm and almost cordial, sliced through the tension like a shard of ice. "Shall we commence?" Unexpected takedown. The air in the makeshift arena crackled. Marco the Mauler Valenti circled Statham, a shark eyeing its prey. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, gloves raised, face a mask of focused aggression. Statham stood still, almost unnervingly so, his hands relaxed, his gaze steady. Izzy, perched precariously on a stack of crates, adjusted her camera. The dim warehouse lights cast long, dramatic shadows, painting the scene like a modern-day gladiatorial contest. Marco feinted left, then lunged. A textbook double-leg takedown, executed with explosive power. He shot in low, wrapping his arms around Statham's thighs, driving forward with all his weight. The crowd roared, a primal sound of anticipation and support for their local hero. Izzy braced herself, her finger hovering over the record button, expecting Statham to be driven back, to scramble, to concede the dominant position. She wanted to capture the moment the underdog faltered. But it never came. Instead, with a fluidity that defied his age and unassuming posture, Statham reacted. As Marco's momentum carried him forward, Statham pivoted, turning his hips, using Marco's own force against him. It wasn't a block, it wasn't a struggle. It was a redirection, a seamless transition into a perfect hip toss, a harai gashi, executed with breathtaking precision. The sound was sickening. A thud, a grunt, the unmistakable crack of air being forced from lungs. Marco, who seconds ago had been a whirlwind of muscle and aggression, was now flat on his back, the wind knocked completely out of him. The roar of the crowd died in its throat, replaced by a stunned silence. Jaws hung open. Marco, the Mauler, the guy who'd been trash-talking Statham for weeks, the local favorite, had been taken down hard. And not just taken down, but completely outclassed. Izzy lowered her camera, her mind reeling. She'd expected a fight, a back-and-forth struggle, maybe even a lucky punch. This was surgical, clinical. It was over before it even began. Marco lay gasping, his face flushed crimson. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked around at the silent crowd, a flicker of shame crossing his features. Statham stood over him, his expression unchanged. He extended a hand. "You okay, kid?" Marco hesitated, then swatted Statham's hand away. He struggled to his feet, his bravado visibly shaken. The air of invincibility had vanished, replaced by a palpable vulnerability. He looked like a kid who'd just had his favorite toy taken away. Izzy zoomed in, capturing the raw emotion on Marco's face. This wasn't the story she came to write. This was something much more compelling. The takedown itself was impressive, but the aftermath, the palpable deflation of Marco's ego, that was pure gold. She had the opening salvo of something big. Humbled, the air in the makeshift ring hung thick with anticipation. Marco, a snarling knot of muscle, circled Statham, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Statham stood motionless, his expression unreadable, a statue carved from granite. The only sound was the rhythmic thump of the bass from the club next door, a dull heartbeat in the charged atmosphere.
Marco Lang.
Not a calculated attack, but a burst of raw aggression, arms windmilling, trying to overwhelm Statham with sheer force. Statham didn't flinch. He stepped inside the wild flurry, a whisper of movement, and the world tilted. One moment, Marco was attacking. The next, he was on his back, the air driven from his lungs in a painful whoosh. Statham had executed a textbook hip toss, a move so swift and effortless it looked almost casual. He was kneeling now, one hand pinning Marco's shoulder to the mat, the weight of his body a crushing burden. Izzy, perched on a stack of beer crates, scribbled furiously in her notepad, her pen scratching against the paper like a trapped insect. She caught the flicker of fear in Marco's eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his jaw. This wasn't the confident swagger she'd witnessed earlier. This was primal panic. Statham held him there, pinned, for perhaps 5 seconds. 5 seconds that stretched into an eternity for Marco. He strained, muscles bulging, trying to buck Statham off, but it was like trying to shift a mountain. The grip on his shoulder was unyielding, a vice of iron. Then, just as suddenly as he'd been taken down, Marco was released. Statham stood, slowly, deliberately, offering Marco a hand up. The gesture was almost more humiliating than the takedown. Marco ignored the outstretched hand. He scrambled to his feet, face crimson, chest heaving. He avoided eye contact, swiping a hand across his sweaty brow. The bravado had evaporated, leaving behind only a residue of shame. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. Statham simply nodded, a slight inclination of his head, a gesture that contained no gloating, no triumph, only a quiet acknowledgement. He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the throng of onlookers. The crowd parted for him, a silent respect replacing the earlier jeering. Izzy watched him go, her mind already racing. This wasn't just a bar fight. It was a statement, a calculated display of control. She chewed on the end of her pen, her gaze shifting back to Marco, who was now being helped up by his entourage, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. The story was writing itself, she realized. The real story wasn't the fight itself, but what it represented. And she was going to be the one to tell it. The aftermath. The internet detonated. Within minutes, grainy phone footage of Marco Valenti's hubris meeting Jason Statham's unflappable calm was everywhere. Hashtag Statham saves the day, hashtag Valenti owned, hashtag Grandpa got hands trended globally. News outlets, initially hesitant to run with unsubstantiated gym gossip, jumped on the bandwagon, citing multiple eyewitness accounts and exclusive amateur video. Valenti's pre-fight taunts, meticulously crafted to project dominance, now echoed with a pathetic, almost cartoonish quality. He became a meme, a cautionary tale about overconfidence. Isabella Diaz watched the digital wildfire consume everything. She'd spent the last few hours meticulously crafting her piece, balancing breathless immediacy with journalistic integrity. She'd interviewed 3 separate witnesses, corroborated details, and even managed to snag a brief comment from a gym employee who, terrified of losing their job, spoke only off the record. Her editor, initially skeptical, had greenlit the story with a speed that surprised even Izzy. The headline blazed across the screen. Asterisk Statham silences Mauler Valenti. Humility wins the day at local gym. Asterisk the article detailed the incident, highlighting Valenti's aggressive posturing and Statham's composed response. It wasn't just a fight recap. It was a character study in contrasts. She painted Valenti as a man consumed by ego, desperate for validation, and Statham as a figure of quiet confidence, a man who didn't need to prove anything. The comments section exploded. Some lauded Statham as a hero, others criticized Valenti's arrogance, and a few even questioned the legitimacy of the entire event, calling it a staged publicity stunt. Izzy scrolled through the digital cacophony, a small smile playing on her lips. Journalism, she thought, was often about holding a mirror up to the world, and sometimes the reflection was surprisingly entertaining. Inside the gym, the atmosphere had shifted. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by a low hum of excited chatter. Marco Valenti was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, he was licking his wounds, both physical and reputational, in private. Jason Statham, however, was still there. He finished his workout, methodically wiping down the equipment before gathering his things. There was no swagger, no gloating, just a quiet, deliberate grace. As he walked towards the exit, he paused near the water cooler, catching Izzy's eye. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A ghost of a smile played on his lips, a smile that suggested he knew exactly the kind of chaos he had unleashed, and that he was perfectly content with it. Then, he was gone, leaving behind a gym buzzing with speculation and a digital world alight with his legend. Izzy watched him go, a feeling of anticipation bubbling inside her. This, she knew, was just the beginning. The challenge had been issued. The stage was set, and she had a front row seat.